I'd like to welcome to the JPP, the Jewish Philanthropy Podcast, Daniel Goldman, live from Israel. Daniel is a partner in Goldrock Capital, which was a firm that was founded by his family. We'll hear more about it in 1990. He brings over 20 years of experience in family office management, private equity, investment banking. He advises families on their core objectives, their values, generational transfer of wealth, best practices, very important issues, both in terms of how it touches upon philanthropy and otherwise. And he's also served as a non-executive director of many public and private companies, often as a lead investor. In addition, he's been active for over 20 years with multiple NGOs as chairman and founder. He writes regularly for the Israeli press about Israel, Israeli society, and he lives in Beit Shemesh with his wife and with his family, with his children. Daniel, it's great to meet you here during the Aseres Yemei Tshuva, during the 10 days of repentance, a critical time of year for what I hope will be a scintillating conversation. Welcome to the program.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So, opening question always is, please share with our guests, please share with our audience a little bit in your own words who you are.
Okay. Well, although I've been in Israel for now 30 years, there are some things you can't change. So I was born and raised in the northeast of England in a industrial city called Newcastle, which had a very, very small Jewish community. For those who are familiar with the British Jewish community, it's a kind of orthodox but traditional, so very much reflective of that background. I went to a Jewish primary school, although there were only like a few dozen kids in it because the community was so small, and then went to regular public school. And sort of skipping forward after university, after many years of being in Bnei Akiva, etc., I made Aliyah as a single person. Started work, went to the army, eventually got married, and the rest, as they say, is history. So there's a very quick
being written as we speak.
No, yeah, exactly.
How did your family come to Newcastle of all places? What's the backstory?
So all of my grandparents were born in England.
Oh wow.
Some of my great-grandparents were born in England, the most of whom came from Russia or the areas around the late 19th century. They all ended up in different Jewish communities in sort of the provinces, so Liverpool, Leeds, Sunderland, etc. And Newcastle, which again is all these other towns and communities are in the north of England. We ended up in Newcastle because after my parents got married, my dad was working there, and so that's where they set up home, and that's where I grew up.
Interesting. You had, just out of curiosity, like you had opportunities, I gather, when you were in high school, like to go to London to kind of see a more vibrant Jewish community. You kind of had a sense of like.
So yeah, I mean, from a very young age, I was part of Bnei Akiva, which I assume most of your viewers and listeners will know about. So twice a year I was at camp, which was a national event. So basically I met kids of my own age through Bnei Akiva from across the country, and actually, be honest to say that many of those people who I met now 40 years ago more are my closest friends, and my kids are friends with their kids. It became a kind of lifelong, the gift that keeps on giving in that sense. And the reason why I made Aliyah and a lot of the sort of basic values that I have around Zionism in Israel really come from that period. And I started going to Bnei Akiva as a 6-year-old, and my kids actually tell me I never stopped. I'm still at it. So
Bnei Akiva just was the primary sponsor of the Shai Ribo concert here in Madison Square Garden.
Right. Yeah. Oh, correct. Yeah.
That was
Mizrahi and Bnei Akiva. Exactly.
Got some excellent PR, through what was a very successful event. Did you? So obviously you were very Zionistic growing up. Did you always presume you'd live in Israel, or not necessarily?
From a pretty young age. Yeah, from a pretty young age. And my parents also the UK community is a really very Zionistic community. I think my dad actually dreamed of himself making Aliyah. For various family reasons and other reasons, he did not make it. But we were always encouraged. Myself and my brother, we both made Aliyah, and we were both hugely encouraged to do so. And for me, it was always like, in sport, you have the crowd sitting on the terraces, and you have the guys on the pitch scoring the goals.
Right.
I'm like, if you're Jewish, you want to score goals. If you want to score goals, it's got to be in Israel. That's what it comes down to, really.
Very hard to argue with that. Okay, excellent, excellent point. So let's talk a little bit about your professional career. In the introduction we talked about this idea how you basically manage you're involved in a family office, both in terms of your own family assets as well as other families. I don't know if somebody grows up at age 15 and says, I want to manage a family office. So maybe take us kind of how you got, where
I'm pretty sure if you do, you don't know what you're talking about. Okay. We actually, myself and my partners, we've been together for many years. In fact, my longest serving partner, we were actually roommates together after he made Aliyah in the 90s. We've been in business together for over 20 years. We didn't actually plan on being a family office. One day we kind of woke up and realized the things that we were doing would look like this thing called a family office. And really that grew out of an investment activity that was really a result of the fact that my dad, who unfortunately, although passed away many years ago, he was a super successful software entrepreneur in the 80s and 90s in the UK. He built a company called Sage, which is still now a listed company on the FTSE 100, etc. And so we started to, in fact, before he passed away, I had started investing with him in various different ventures. And really, we kind of evolved from that into being a family office in the sense of not just taking care of some of the investments, but actually looking out in a holistic fashion for everything that's, economic, financial, that deals with the wider sense of family. And once we discovered that that's what we looked like, then we were like, oh, we better do a proper job. So we kind of tooled up, professionalized, hired people, put technology in place. And it was at that stage we opened out from being a single family office, which is typically for one family, to being what's called a multifamily office. And now we are working with quite a number of different families doing exactly that same activity on their behalf. So it's global investing and reporting on the assets and really dealing with all of the financial complications that arrive with significant wealth. So we kind of fell into it almost.
Interesting. So I know some people in the space, and I've had some conversations with people like yourself. It's a curiosity of mine, in the sense that I think some people run family offices. They're not. It's not their. I don't know if they all are outgrowths of their own, and then they expand. I know people that kind of like they go into the space and they run a family office for other families. They're comfortable people, they're successful people in their own right. They don't necessarily have the wealth that their clients have. I'm curious, like, is it yesh v'yesh? Are there different models? Is it unique?
I can tell you most specifically about how family offices have evolved in Israel, and in the main, what we see is probably the majority of the family offices are people who are coming from more asset management or wealth management backgrounds, who then set up a family office either for existing clients or they go out and build a client base. There is a smaller group who may have come in from accounting or the legal profession, or at the side of an existing professional firm, they open a family office alongside. I actually don't know of many, I can't even tell you any single family offices that I know of in Israel that then became multifamily offices. So I think we're almost unique in that. And when the next question is, well, if you had a single family office, why bother?
Why the headache, right?
Yeah, exactly. What do you want? Life's good without clients. So first of all, we're Baruch Hashem, we're in a comfortable position as a family, but to do the job properly, it's quite a significant investment of time and money. And our assumption was that we could actually end up doing a better job for ourselves if, in addition to that, we're doing it for other people. You know, I would be honest to say that when you're working for other people, the level of discipline about their wealth and assets is going to be higher than the level of discipline about your own.
Right.
So actually what it forced us to do and allowed us to do was to hire some great people, invest in some technology, and actually really upgrade the whole way that we ran the business. And ultimately, we have benefited dramatically from that. And, you know, just for the sake of transparency, as a family, we are a client just like everybody else. So we pay and we receive services like everybody.
Oh, wow. I would imagine also.
And I happen to work here as well, but the business isn't family owned. I happen to be a founding partner in it.
Interesting. I think right. I would imagine also just in terms of, you know, when you're vetting opportunities, or you're just, for example, let's say there's a very prominent hedge fund or some, you know, where you want to invest in, you presumably have a lot more leverage in terms of more assets to bring to the table. Right. So totally. I mean, it makes sense on a lot of levels. I'm saying
story altogether. 100%. Yeah.
It does.
By the way, vice versa, relative to, say, let's say I just jumped out of Goldman Sachs and started a family office. When our families, our clients, know that when we are recommending a new fund or an investment, we are in it with them. So we have the same gain and same pain alongside our clients. And again, this is not to say anything bad about regular multifamily offices. You know, I have to look at my own family's eyes if we make a bad decision. Okay, it doesn't guarantee that we'll make always smart decisions, but it does guarantee that I'm pretty focused on making sure we do a good job.
But I've had the privilege to talk to a lot of high net worth people, and I've heard all different types of horror stories in terms of conflicting interests, and in terms of you'd be surprised that some of these people just want to have those basic benefit. Put me in a nice little mutual fund because they don't want to deal with all the. It's funny. Okay.
Unfortunately, we benefit from those conflicts in the sense of we have absolutely set our store out that we are 100% independent. We are only paid by our clients. We take no rebates, kickbacks, discounts, winks, nods. And I think over time the market appreciates the approach. By the way, in most regular, say, European markets, and I'm not 100% familiar with the US, if you say you're a family office, it is assumed that you are 100% independent. In Israel, a little bit like here, if you're buying or selling a house, it can be one broker who's acting for both sides, right? Which you'd never do that in New York or London. Here it's kind of, this is the way it is. We cannot work that way.
I hear. Fascinating. Okay, so talk a little bit about. I'd love to hear just a little bit about your father, Zichron Livracha. You mentioned he passed away a while ago.
Yeah.
But it must be interesting, like kind of growing up the son of somebody who brought a company public. I mean, that's like that's a big accomplishment in the world of business. I'd love to hear what that was like.
Yeah. So, by the way, I will send to you, and I don't know if it's something you can share with your viewers. We just did
you sent it to me, and I will.
Okay. So
brother's interview. So I will. Okay. So it's cool. Your office has its own podcast, and that's good to know.
Yeah. So exactly.
I'm happy to link to that episode as well. Sure.
Right. And obviously we'll.
I didn't get a chance yet to listen to it myself, but I do have it. Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, my dad passed away in 1999, right before the burst of the original internet balloon.
I guess he was relatively young. How old was he?
He was just 62 when he passed away, and he had suffered from cancer for a couple of years. And it is absolutely worth mentioning, because we're talking also not just about business today, but philanthropy, that first of all, he came from, the classic novel background of, very challenged economic environment, post-war England up north, His dad had not worked for many, many years after the war through ill health, etc. And so he grew up in significant financial insecurity. He left school age 16 himself through ill health, so he did not complete his education. He went out to work, and for really, 30 years, he scraped along. He ran for many years a local printing factory, not a particularly large business. He always had the mindset of an entrepreneur. He was always looking for, the next thing to do and how to improve things. That just along the way, none of those things actually turned out into a particularly big winner. And then at the sort of end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, when computing was starting to become a thing, he basically introduced computing into his printing business. And not to spoil completely the podcast with my brother, but that basically ended up turning into the development of an accounting package, a sort of generic small business accounting and payroll package. And although my dad knew absolutely nothing about computing or programming or anything of that sort, he did have a pretty good eye for marketing and understood that there was going to be a hugely emerging opportunity around small businesses adopting software. And so he basically started to market this accounting software to small businesses in the UK, and at a certain stage became the #1 market share owner of this product space. And through the sort of mid 80s, late 80s, early 90s, it just grew at a super rapid rate. They did actually raise some venture capital early on, but not much. And the company was so cash flow positive almost from day one. They never actually touched the money that they had raised. And the first serious excuse me, the first serious money they raised was in 1989 when they went public on the London Stock Exchange. At the time, a very small, even then it was a really reasonably small transaction. If I tell you that the market cap of Sage when it went public, I think was around 13 million pounds, 13. Wow. Okay. If you consider now, unicorns and,
right. Wow.
Where the world has moved in the intervening period.
Wow.
But then what really, apart from owning huge market share in the UK, they then went post the IPO on a very long and successful journey of acquisitions. So they ended up buying businesses in France and Germany and Spain and the US and South Africa, and and it typically became the defining principle of the acquisition strategy was, we want to be the market leader in any market that we are going to be in. And not to bore everybody with the details of accounting software, which is, other than perhaps family office, one of the most boring things you can talk about. Because of the nature of
we're going to get into Israeli politics soon, so don't worry. We're gonna...
then it definitely would be more spicy. But the nature of accounting is that in every regime, every country, the way accounts are prepared, and of course the accounting rules and the tax rules are different in every country. So unlike a sort of classic software company that you write one piece of software and then you sell it globally and you build a sort of global business that way, here you had to have the right product for France, the right product for Germany, the right product for Spain, America, So you couldn't just take the Sage product and sell it into these countries. You actually had to either build or buy a local product. So that's what drove the acquisition strategy. And it was on the basis that they were going to be market leaders in almost every territory that they ended up being in, except for the States, where obviously Intuit remained the big beast on the block.
Fascinating. It's interesting, just a comparison. I'm not making a comparison. I'm not qualified to compare, but it's just interesting. Like Steve Jobs, although obviously was quite a wizard technologically, but I think he's really known for his marketing abilities, right? In the sense that he's able to, to market Apple products, how he, with his 3 points and so on and so forth. Just the ability to market is so critical, whether, how much you do or don't know about the nitty gritty of the product, You know,
my dad would always say we're a marketing company that happens to sell computer software.
Interesting. Okay. How did your dad feel just about, like you said, like a rags to riches type of story, and it didn't happen, overnight, in essence, it took a lot of time. But towards the end of his life, how do you feel about his accomplishments?
Yeah. So first of all, the driver in the formative years of growing the business went, I think, back to his own youth around financial security. And it was really predominantly around making sure that his family was secure financially. It wasn't per se around a motivation of making money, but making sure that he was financially secure. And actually, in some ways, after the float in the IPO in 1989, when ostensibly financial security had been achieved, instead of working less, he then worked more. It sort of unleashed a whole other set of.
He was now free. He was now free to.
It was kind of, yeah. I never really spoke to him about that in detail, but I mean, and the truth of the matter is, he and his vice chairman and the CFO, they literally trotted the world looking for businesses. I mean, it was an amazing. So I think the first and most important thing was, it was about achieving financial security, which, by 1989 he himself was over 50. So that was number one. I think the second thing was obviously this entrepreneurial drive that he'd had always, but it never actually came to fruition. He became, it was a very energizing experience from that perspective, being able to do that. I think the other thing, maybe, since this is this podcast, two other things I think are legacies of my dad's, which are super important. Number one, he always understood that the people in the team were everything. So he had this kind of funny custom of walking around the office, which ended up being quite a big, a lot of people, and he would jingle his small change in his pocket as he walked around the office, so that nobody would think he's coming to check on them or surprise them. Everybody knew he was, and really it was about, how are your kids? Was it, was it okay at the pub last night, and what's happening in the football at the weekend? And not, have you finished your task for today? Because what he instinctively knew was, if you carry the goodwill of your colleagues and your employees, you're going to get 120% when you need it. And that was just, my dad totally believed in that as a business concept. It was who he was, but it also a business concept. And I think the other thing was that he didn't upgrade the house. He didn't really, there was no meaningful change in the sort of day-to-day lifestyle once wealth appeared. And again, I don't think it was any sort of major philosophical thought process for him. It was just like, yeah, I like my armchair listening to my music in the lounge. That's good enough.
And I would posit, if initially it's about security, so it doesn't really fit, in terms of, some people try to they want.
And my dad, he dreamed about driving a Jag, right?
Right.
So eventually he bought a Jag. It's fine.
Right.
He wasn't embarrassed about spending money if it was something that he felt he wanted or needed.
Sure.
But it wasn't like the driver to it wasn't
right.
particularly.
You're dating me. I don't see Jaguars anymore, ever, anywhere. When I was younger, Jaguars were a big thing. Now I don't know, it moved on to other cars, I guess, but I guess people still have Jaguars somewhere. Very interesting. So I'm going to count that as an inspirational figure in your life. I'm going to ask if there's maybe one other. I'm sure there's many, but maybe one other person you want to talk a little bit about who also inspires and motivates you.
Okay, so
Your family still involved with this company today? Just
no. In fact, because effectively my dad set it up with three other partners, it really wasn't a family business from day one in that sense. I mean, you know, my brother, who's much more tech oriented, he used to go and, you know, program in the summer, and I would work in the warehouse a little bit, but really nothing. There was no expectation, and to a certain degree, because we lived in a very small Jewish community, and the understanding was that we would either make Aliyah or move to a bigger community as we grew up. It just, you know, it just wasn't a thing.
Is this company based in Newcastle or in London?
Yeah, the HQ is still, I think it's still technically headquartered out of Newcastle, which is super unusual.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and remember, again, I don't know if you followed the economics of the UK in the 1980s. Northeast of England was a disaster zone economically during the sort of early Thatcher years, when the coal mines were closing and the steel factories were closing, and there was really nothing going on. And Sage became a kind of beacon of, oh, wow, actually something interesting is happening in Newcastle. That is how relevant it became locally, not just from the perspective of, you know, something interesting from
there's an American parallel, if I'm not mistaken. Malden Mills, if you heard of the
of course, yeah,
Forrestine family and what he did for that area, and you know,
amazing guy.
My wife's grandfather worked in the mills.
Wow.
America, they always had tremendous gratitude to the Forrestine family, because that's what sustained them. So I can definitely appreciate that concept.
Now, obviously, I did not know him, but I bet you he felt like my dad, which was not so much that people should have Hakara Satov to him. He had Hakara Satov to the region that allowed him to do what he did. Very, very core to the way he felt about it, and you know, all the way through his life.
Excellent. So if there's another person
inspiring. So first of all, and in a completely cliched way, my kids have become an inspiration to me, and my wife is a major inspiration to me. She has, you know, characteristics in the way she goes about doing things, and her single-mindedness in life is something which, you know, is literally I think of almost every day.
Is your wife British? Is your wife British or from somewhere else?
My wife, actually, she's a little bit half. So she grew up part of the time in Sunderland, which is right near Newcastle, and part of the time in New York, in Muncie. And so her dad was UK and her mum was New York. So I think because her sort of teenagers were New York, she feels more American than English. But in the couple of decades that we've been married, I'm hoping that we're kind of redressing that issue.
That's interesting. My wife is actually from Vienna, Austria, but she moved to New York. She moved to New Jersey when she was 15.
Okay.
We've basically Americanized her. I don't know if she'll like me saying this, but she's not really European at this point. But I hear, yeah.
So I mean, those are my day-to-day inspirational
your kids
stuff.
How do your kids inspire you? In what way? In what ways?
So as they have, I mean, they're not that old. My oldest is 22, my youngest is 14. Can I know I have five kids? As they have as they have grown older, the way that they look at their own life decisions and deal with the challenges of the 21st century that I didn't have to deal with at their age, has kind of, in many ways, retaught me how to be a parent. I'm looking at it differently today than I would have done 5 or 10 years ago. But my wife would probably just say I was just being a bad parent before. But and so you know, I went to the army 30 years ago here, but it's a different ball game. I mean, my eldest has already been in the army. My second is now in the army. They've both been through. They've seen, you know, other. Thank God, neither of them personally have been through very, very difficult things, but they've had close friends who have been through very difficult periods in the army and seen other stuff. And just the way that they have responded to that, to the people that are around them, as you know, has just been inspiring to me. It's like amazing to see your kids kind of just, sort of stretch up, become the adults that you hope that they may become to be. And that they're just kids, so then they're absolutely imperfect and annoying in many ways. But when you really tear that away, I'm very proud of who they are becoming.
Okay, I think it's an excellent point, just in terms of the inherent maturity of growing up in Israel is not growing up in America or anywhere else in the world, and
it is different.
And the responsibilities and
just a
the
different
opportunities do kind of breed a certain maturity and a certain you see things that maybe you may not want to see, but it's the reality of of our homeland, and it's something that
well, I just to put a hard edge on it for a second, both of my kids who either in or have been in the army have already lost people of their age that died in the army.
Really? Wow.
I just like, and I suddenly find myself in a position where I'm like, I'm not really even sure I can fully, right? As a parent, you're like, I've been through lots of things, and therefore, I can guide or help or support. And suddenly I felt like all I can do is just say I'm here because actually you're doing something I've never had to deal with. And as I say, I went through the army, but fortunately it didn't happen to me. Not in a close way that it happened to both of them. And so
this is incredibly, this is a little bit different point, but it's actually to strengthen your point, just a personal experience. So I went to Yeshivat Shalavim 2 years after high school, my gap years, and I was there in 1990, 91, which was the Gulf War. And so here I am. I guess I'm go back. I guess I'm 18 years old, and we have to go. It's January, mid-January of 91, and we have to go into a cheder atum, a sealed room. And the very first time, that the rockets, started coming, you start to think like like I remember, like I'm 18 years old. Like, is this it? Like, thankfully we're still here talking, many years later, but. Okay, that's but the fact that was such a fleeting thought, and it was like such an anomalous thought, because it's so foreign to like a typical 18-year-old's experience. And in contrast, it's very typical. I think it's not atypical at all so it's very striking, that contrast. Very interesting.
I think other people that have inspired me, certainly from a sort of Jewish perspective, particularly from a Jewish perspective,
sure.
I think rabbis like Rav Amital.
You went to Gush? I guess you're a Gush alum?
I did not go to Gush, but I definitely consider him to be.
When were you exposed to him? Just from his writings, or?
I was involved in Meimad back in the 90s.
Okay.
Which he was kind of
the political party. Okay. Yeah.
The political party, but it became a political party, but really it was a social idea. Okay. And actually, probably my personal rabbi, if you will, who was my shaliach when I was a student in London, he is Rav Amital's son-in-law, Yehuda Gilad, who himself runs the yeshiva up north. And so I had some direct exposure to Rav Amital, but it's mostly through, reading, teaching, listening, etc.
Fascinating.
I have become over the years a great follower of Rabbi Sachs.
Not surprising, okay, considering your roots.
Not massively surprising. And in recent years, I have become very much interested in the writing of Heschel.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm really British. Okay, think characteristically British, and even from a Jewish perspective, Britain really is it's a sort of subcategory of Yekka in many ways.
Really? Okay, my wife is a Yekka. So
the English part of it. Obviously, there are other parts of the community, but it's like a.
No, I get that.
And so I was never exposed to at all in any way any sort of Hasidic thought at all.
Interesting.
To a degree that probably for most of my life, I'm like, I just don't know what that stuff's about. It doesn't speak to me. And having read his biography of the early years before he was in North America, okay, growing up in Warsaw and going to high school afterwards in Vilna, and then moving to Berlin, and understanding what a deep yichus he had from a Hasidic point of view. Everything you read of him and about him for the rest of his life is informed by that background, just everything. And in an ironic sort of a way, and I don't know, it's interesting, I wouldn't consider myself to be a Heschel scholar in any, I'm an avid lay reader, no more than that. Okay. But he has opened my eyes to ideas that I think are basically Hasidic without being sort of Tish Hasidism, if you follow my meaning.
Right.
And I actually found them to be, in a world where grappling between, and here's the sort of Sachs piece, grappling between the universal ideas and the particular ideas of Judaism, right? The global and the very specific. And rationality has become so dominant on the one hand, and yet mysticism is either misunderstood or abused. I found Heschel to be a good window into trying to resolve some of those.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so I found that to be, and in all honesty, I have to be honest. Until I was about 40 years old, I hadn't read probably any decent books at all. Sforim books. I learned. I read stuff, but actually, I only really started thinking about things in any serious way until I was 40. So
interesting. What happened then? What happened then? What was the pivot?
Another guy actually who will be embarrassed if I say his name, so I'm not going to do it. But a lay person, really, really smart guy, happens to have YU smicha, but always says YU keeps calling me to ask it back, ask for the smicha back. He ended up in business doing extremely, extremely well.
I don't think they do that, but yeah.
Yeah, very fine a mensch, very, very good. He had started like towards retirement, not that I'm anywhere near retirement, but towards retirement, he'd started thinking about, Bible and Bible criticism. And he was always a religious person his entire life. And he'd started going to conferences where he was the only guy, and it was like professors and all academics. And he actually told me a funny story. He said, I didn't yet meet a professor that if I said, I'll buy you a cup of coffee, wasn't prepared to sit down and have a chat and speak about his scholarship. And he said, look, it doesn't, all this stuff, which the history and the, thinking about, Torah in a more critical fashion, none of this has undermined the fact that I'm a good Jew who keeps mitzvahs, etc. But it has actually allowed me to probably deepen his relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I sort of had this moment like, wait, religion and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yes, they are correlated, but they don't have to always be as in sync as we were told in Cheder. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it freed me up to start thinking a little bit more openly about ideas and philosophies, etc., that haven't really taken me away from any of my religious behaviors per se, but actually have allowed me to deepen my thoughts about the world and the meaning of why we do things. And
I love the idea that growing people are constantly evolving, and that we don't have to be kind of it's perfect for Aseres Yemei Tshuva, right? You don't have to be stuck in the same milieu and the same thought processes and the same behaviors as just because we have done it a certain way for so long doesn't mean that this year can't be different, that we can't begin to explore new things, read new things.
So I don't want to wax too lyrical, but it's if you think about Rav Amital, Rav Sachs, and Rav Heschel, all three of them, in a completely different way, journeyed through very eclectic Jewish or academic or sociological existences, right?
Okay.
Rav Amital grew up in Hungary, went through the Holocaust, did not really come from any sort of rabbinic background, arrived in Israel. He actually taught with Rav Shach in Yeshivat HaDarom for many years, then ended up in the Gush, and he was, by the way, inspired very, very early on, even though he didn't come from that sort of background at all, by the writings of Rav Kook. But he didn't stay just in the realm of reading Rav Kook as the only way to understand the world. Jonathan Sacks, he started up as a regular British Jew who ended up in Cambridge on his way to being a philosopher, was inspired both by the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the Rav, and then really his real teacher ended up Rav Rabinovich, who was a maths professor before he became a Rosh Yeshiva. And so you get another, really eclectic.
Yeah, it's a gestalt. It's a broader gestalt for sure.
Right, and Heschel himself, he grew up his father was a relatively small Admor, but he was like an Admor's Admor, right? He was like the Rebbe to the Rebbes in Warsaw, and he was going to be a Rebbe. That was it. He was going to be an Admor. That was and he felt he needed something else, and he got sent to Vilna, where he completed his high school education. Then he ended in Berlin, and in Berlin at that time he was, it was him and Rav Soloveitchik before he was Rav Soloveitchik, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe before he was the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and Martin Buber, and the list goes on. 1930s in Berlin, and he starts writing in, again, it's kind of an amalgam of and it's not pluralism of confusion. I like, we're just gonna, it's just a fruit salad of all. It's a kind of, we're gonna take the things from the journey that we go along in life and create something new and unique that is authentic. In all three of those journeys are super authentic, but completely different, right?
Very nice. Let's we could continue these conversations. This is a great conversation.
Yes, indeed.
Let's move a little bit in our remaining time. I want to talk about two other things. I want to talk first about philanthropy. We are the Jewish Philanthropy podcast, so we try to give a little bit of time just to constructs of philanthropy. I happen to have noticed when I looked on your company webpage for a moment that there's even a list of different organizations that are supported by your company. So I'd love to just hear, it could be professional thoughts, personal thoughts. I mean, you work with a lot of clients. I'm sure you have a lot to say about, generational wealth. I'm sure you have a lot to say. We're not going to have a whole long conversation about it, but a few thoughts just about what philanthropy means to you, how you guide other people with philanthropy, how people prioritize. Nobody has unlimited, infinite resources. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts.
So I would just go back to my dad to say that I learned about giving from my dad, really from my parents. My dad was the active one, but my mom was always there. And
is your mother still alive?
My mother's still alive. Yeah, she's wonderful. 83, she made Aliyah. She lives just by us here in Beit Shemesh.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and she's pretty active in her own right, doing philanthropy and stuff. My dad really taught us by action that when you have no money, Tzedaka is obviously what you do, and when you do have money, it's something you can't do without giving. And so that the idea that we are always in the process of giving back to the community with time and with money and resource, etc., is something which I think both my brother and I we received long before my dad was famous and successful. So that would be, I think, point number one. In fact, he had a nice little thing which used to tell us that, life is about, you're either part of the solution or part of the problem. So choose.
Okay.
I think
you're either a giver or a taker. There's different formulations of this.
Yeah, to a degree. Yeah. And I think the second thing, which is very relevant, I think, today about philanthropy, I think about it as what today most people would consider strategic philanthropy or professional philanthropy, but a lot of people forget tzedakah.
Okay.
And philanthropy isn't necessarily tzedakah.
Okay.
Okay. Ultimately, tzedakah is it's not about theory of change and strategic goals and mission statements.
Beautiful.
It's about somebody who either knocks on your door or is in your community, or it can be near or far, it doesn't really matter, and is sick or poor or right, the ger, yatom, v'almana, etc. And I think the giving up of a kind of kishka type giving that says, I see somebody who needs my help, but it's not strategic. I'm not moving the needle. I'm sure you know all of this stuff.
The sprach. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to keep something aside always for the tzedakah, always. And by the way, I think if you want to hand over generationally the idea of giving, philanthropy in and of itself is not enough. You've got to have the tzedakah, right? Because it's a much closer, more intimate connection to the specific. It is a more retail form of philanthropy.
In my mind, I almost see it as like it's like there's a great idea that that and often the biggest gap in life is from what's in our minds to having it in our hearts, right? We say alav avecha. A lot of times things sit on our hearts, but they don't penetrate the heart. And to me, the distinction, we say like the chakira, the distinction that you're making almost is like philanthropy is almost like it's very thoughtful, it's very logical, right? And tzedakah has to come from the heart. It has to be visceral. It has to be, there's a need here. Somebody's knocking on my door. They don't have something. I have to do what I can to alleviate their suffering and their pain. It may be illogical, but that's not my cheshbon.
Sometimes somebody knocks on your door, you're not necessarily in the mood.
I happen to live in a neighborhood.
I don't know which neighborhood you live in.
I live in North Woodmere, New York, in the 510 area.
Yeah,
grateful. It's a burgeoning, flourishing,
wonderful community
neighborhood. There's tremendous infrastructure going up by the day here. And I notice, along with all the growth of the people and the infrastructure, there are more and more mishulachim that are here knocking on our door. And they're like my best friends. They come in. Like my wife's like, "How do these guys know you?" I'm like, "I don't think they know me." I think
yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're not necessarily my best friend, but so that I think we philanthropy is super important, and social change is key, and understanding that is great, but it has not to be completely at the expense of tzedakah. When I think of philanthropy, there I'm trying to think strategically, and I'm always looking for the Archimedes intervention. Most of my philanthropy in Israel is dedicated to Israeli society and thinking about what are the things that keep me awake at night.
What are some of the things that keep you awake at night?
Well, I was chairman of Geshe for a number of years, so social cohesion is a huge issue. It's in the last 9 months or so, it's become an even bigger issue. For me, the formative event in Israeli society since I made Aliyah was in 1995 when Rabin was assassinated, and to me that was the point of understanding that ultimately, if we are united, then our enemies will not be able to be successful. But if we are disunited, then anybody can take us. So I've sort of dedicated a lot of thought around and philanthropy and doing around that. It's a super complicated issue, and Jews are a tremendously traumatized, eclectic bunch. So anybody who talks about unity is already suspect of, really talking about homogeneity. Whereas unity actually can only be created within a sense of valuing diversity.
Right.
I don't mean that in the sort of necessarily the 21st century sense of diversity, but the sense that we as human beings, and certainly as Jews, ultimately are very diverse, but we bring great added value to one another by appreciating that. And we spend most of our time worrying about try and win that argument rather than understand that, I'm not going anywhere, and the Haredim are not going anywhere, and the secular people are not going anywhere, and the Arabs aren't going anywhere. Okay, if that's my assumption, now what is my next step forward? So that's a big issue, I think, that I
would say so.
definitely.
That's huge. I mean, any and I'm sure there are successes. Any successes in terms of bridging these gaps are going to be transformational. Not easily accomplished, but certainly
It
worth
is hard
investing.
work. Yeah, and it's a step forward and two backwards often, but
No, I
so
get
that's one aspect. I have spent the last 10 years working both as an activist and really as a social entrepreneur, and also in philanthropy, working on relations between the Haredi community and the rest of Israel. Okay, that's obviously a big strategic
Are you connected
issue.
to my friend Yonason Rosenblum at all? Have you had interactions with?
I have had it in the past, certainly.
He
And
writes a lot about Kesher Yehudi, and he writes a lot about these issues.
Absolutely, yeah. He's fully invested in this. So I've been more focused around the employment, training, academia, and sort of education piece.
Cross River Bank is involved with that, I think, a little bit.
On the employment side, yeah, very
Yaakov
much
Gade
so.
was on the
They're
podcast.
employing, they're doing some good stuff. So I have a couple of startups in that area. I've been, pretty active with that. And again, the Haredim today are 13% of the overall population. They are going to be 25-30% of the population. And there are economic questions around that. There are cultural and social questions around that. I think, what has been unleashed in the last 9 months suggests there are also political, not on at a sort of party political, but like structural political level. I think there are issues around that. And it's going to be a defining process around what Israel is going to look like as a Jewish country, as a modern country, or as a democratic country, or indeed all of those three things together. So
just as an observation, so it's interesting to me because I do have familiarity with both communities in Israel, and I've spent a lot of time in both communities, and I have relatives and close friends in both communities. And
sure.
it's not so common for me to see people, let's say, who are in the religious Zionist camp, who are outwardly seeking to create bridges with the Haredi camp. I actually have not met that many people like that. I tend to hear sometimes Haredim talking about it. So it's interesting. Just so that you're an interesting person.
I'm obsessed with it.
A lot of people I know are a little afraid of the Haredim, so that's interesting in a certain level, or have negative.
For sure. I mean, listen, one of the issues, not the only issue, but undoubtedly one of the issues is that
resentment,
stereotypes abound.
Right.
Okay, but at the same degree, there are substantive issues.
Sure.
The stereotypes make it much more difficult to generate meaningful dialogue. But there is also a sort of Haredi paradox, which is, on the one hand, in order to break down those stereotypes, we need to have some type of, level playing field communication. Any building of that channel of communication, by definition, is lowering the walls, or the virtual walls that are there from a Haredi perspective to protect the community from not being Haredi. So navigating that little that physical divide is a tricky issue. Part of the way to think about it, or one of the ways to think about it, is that Israel needs more and more people who are bilingual in this sense. So they feel comfortable speaking to a secular or a religious Zionist audience, but also understand really well how to speak Haredi, and vice versa. They feel super comfortable and understand the cultural sensitivities of talking to and communicating and working and partnering with the Haredi community, okay, which is by definition always going to be a very sensitive event, but at the same time know how to speak and talk to and communicate at an eye level with non-Haredi communities. And in essence, what Gesher has always tried to do is to train leaders to speak in a bilingual, genuinely culturally bilingual fashion. It's not the only thing that we need, but the people who can feel comfortable, probably sounds like a bit like yourself, who feel comfortable actually speaking and being with people from multiple backgrounds, they actually can be the agents of, the bridge builders, if you will, in what is a complex gig. There is a third sort of strategic thing, which I'm not really involved with, which is around the relations between the Jewish majority and the Arab minority. I actually think a little bit like the way I think about the Haredi community. It has just as much opportunity as it has risk. And I also think about it not from rights and democracy, but I think about it as a Jewish responsibility. Okay, we are in the majority.
Interject there for a second. I'm blanking on his name right now. Mr. D, right?
Leo.
Yeah. So he's
Sure.
I mean, he's very. I think he's very outspoken in this space.
He's made some very, very interesting comments on this, and I think as the religious community, we are missing a trick by not framing that debate positively within a Jewish language and Jewish concept.
Okay.
And I don't have to tell you.
Rabbi Sachs would unfortunately he's not.
Oh, well, yeah, this is where he comes completely to the fore. Totally.
Right.
Completely.
Right.
But as does Rav Amital, as does but it is, in a global wave tsunami of nationalism and populism, making that argument is a challenge.
No, I understand. Daniel, this was a fascinating, riveting discussion, and there's a lot more we can talk about. But I want to thank you for making the time to be our guest and to share your thoughts. And I gained a tremendous amount. I'm sure our listeners will as well. And I want to wish you a Gemar Chatima Tova and a good Geven Shur. And only
Gemar Chatima to everybody, and Shekol Tfiloteinu Yitkablu Baratzon.